Hey YouTube, I'm Jared. You're on the Bonsai Echo channel. Today I have this old larch that's been in this pot for a long time. Has had some bonsai training from its previous grower. They had a very loose style as far as letting these branches kind of do what they wanted to. They did most of the work just by trimming. There was a main leader that came off of that central part that was chopped back to lower the height of this, and then a couple of these other branches had the same thing happen within the last several years. There's no wire scars on this because it doesn't appear to have been wired. And if you notice as I turn, it is actually really one-sided. There's a large portion of this side here that has no branches on it. So I'm going to be attempting to do some gentle styling to this because I want to retain that no wire scarring look on it. And I'll probably be deciding first thing what I'm going to be doing with this upper portion that has no branching, all in this one huge section. Looking at it just as I turn, it has this nice area here that looks like it could be the new top of the tree. I'm almost certain I already know that I want to remove this entire top portion. I just need to decide if I'm going to be cutting that clean here at the base of this junction, or if I'm going to be leaving some and creating some deadwood feature out of it. Looking at the tree, there's no other deadwood feature anywhere else on the tree. So to have just this one deadwood feature at the top, it may be a little bit out of place. If I do create that, I'm going to be also pulling in a little bit more of that down into these lower branches, potentially down at the roots, and also potentially a couple of sections along the trunk, either today or in the future. So to start with, here goes the top. I've already decided I'm not going to keep it, so there it goes. It's rather tall, so I don't really have much use for that top section. And as I start to take these out, you'll start to see pretty quick that that top section, looking at the thickness of the trunk and the remainder of the branches, it did have a nice tall look with it, but this would be probably a relatively small pot this would go into based on the size of the trunk and that top portion up there. This tree would probably blow over in some of the winds that I get around here, and it would just always look very, very tall. Well, that's no longer an issue now. So now as I turn it around, you can see I have some decisions to make pretty quickly. My thick branches are both on the same side. They are directly above each other, and also these upper portions are very thick for their height and above each other. The branches on the opposite side, these are the smallest two branches on the entire tree, and they're almost the lowest on the tree, which on a older conifer, this being a Japanese larch, is a deciduous conifer, you wouldn't normally see the thinnest branches down lowest. You'd see a thicker branch down low, which could lead me to believe that this thick, long one, this branch that comes out really far away from the trunk, could be something that would make this tree look more like a natural older tree. Another thing I don't really care for with this particular branch is that it's almost directly across from this thick branch here. What that could look like is a sort of a T that could create the dreaded inverse taper that people talk about in bonsai circles. One thing I do like about that branch is that it's really the only thing on that side that is bringing some interest back in that direction. I can also pull in another branch to fill in that side a little bit more, and I could potentially create some foliage on that side with just those two little branches. You could go ahead and put in the comments if you like, what would you do in this situation with those two branches? One thing I'll be telling you is I won't be choosing a front on this tree. If you've watched some of my other videos, it's not my thing to choose a front on a tree, but I will have several different directions that I prefer to look at the tree. I do generally use a round pot, or a pot that doesn't have a directional look to it, such as a rectangle or an oval. I don't use in my collections very much. So you'll see me spinning this tree around a lot. Okay, so we talked about the branching, what I need to do with that. Another thing I need to figure out is if I like this angle of the trunk. It's pretty well rooted in this pot. I don't think it's been repotted or had root work in probably the last 5 to 10 years based on the other trees that this grower had in their collection. So it would be very easy just to keep it at this level. The branches have been growing at that level for quite a while. It would also be pretty easy just to tilt it a little bit and just figure out if I would prefer it to be more of a straight upright, or straight-ish upright. That was a small amount of tilt to get it to be pretty much upright like that. I just used a little, one of my tools I don't use very much, to wedge the trunk into place. And in fact, this has been in here so long that the pot is cracking here down at the bottom. So we're probably talking 10 years with no root work for this. All right, so this trunk has some nicely aged bark with fissures, flaking bark chunks that are pretty firmly attached. It's not a fragile bark, so I'm not really worried too much about damaging the bark. But at the same time, I don't really want to be wrapping wires around this as I arrange branches, so I'm going to be doing this almost entirely with guy wires. And for that, I'm just going to use this little screw, which is like a decking screw, so it's able to handle outdoor weather. And also, I was able to color the end of it a dark color, so it'll basically blend in with this. Now what I'm going to do is go in between the fissures of the bark, and that way I'm not going right in between any of that really lovely flaky bark. All right, so here's where I get the questions a lot. Aren't you hurting the tree when you're installing the screw into the trunk? I'll be honest, I don't know if trees feel pain, but I do know that when I remove this screw after it's done its work, there'll be a very small little entry point where I put in this screw that will remain as a hole. That hole will heal over within months, 2 to 3 months during the growing season, and that hole will not even be able to be seen ever again, and that will seal up that hole that I have remaining there after I take the screw out. Now while the screw's in there, some healing will happen slightly around the screw, and again, you won't see that at all. If I do have a section where there was a branch cut off, I would go right into the center of where that branch stub was, and then it'll be as if I had done some carving and created a hole. So tiny little hole from these screws. As long as insects don't get in through that hole, I don't ever see any damage to any trees by installing a screw for that. So with that in mind, I would say this doesn't hurt the tree. Very wild looking. I definitely didn't want this larch to look like a bonsai. I didn't want this to have defined foliage pads that have a very flat bottom, cloud-shaped top. I wanted this to look a little bit more like a larch tree that I may actually see that's near me, growing in the mountains, suffering from the weather extremes in the wintertime. Those sorts of larches I'm talking about, they have more of a not a rounded shaped foliage pad on each branch. They have more of a triangle shape. The tree is generally triangular top to bottom, with maybe a little bit of a flame shape coming out of the bottom because the lower branches have drooped down so low. In this one, I feel like what I'm seeing is a tree that was probably taller at some point and had a lot of stuff break off on this side. In order to tell that story, these lower branches in the future may very likely become deadwood features to show that struggle. After I do this deadwood feature, I'll probably wind up extending that deadwood feature down a little ways. What I did so far is I removed all the foliage. So I have made it where there's no draw, there's no need for sap to extend into this upper section, which means anything that feeds it from this side here won't have much going on. Once that happens, there'll be a little dieback probably in here, and I'll be able to refine where the deadwood's going to be, and I could probably attach it to some of these lower branches and probably all the way down to the end here. So since bonsai is a long-term endeavor, I don't need to do that today. I don't really have to do any defined detail wiring on this right now either. Basically, the next step is doing a little bit of this deadwood work on that top part, and then after that it will be cleaning up the lower section and trying to find a pot that will work well for it. So you can see from this tree that it definitely has a very one-sided look to it, and as you go up into the branching, it is again trying to reach for the sky up here at the top. You get in a little bit closer, we'll see if I could actually focus on some of these branches here. You see those bright colored ends there? That's some nice new growth from last year. Those have nice healthy buds. Some of these older sections have a lot of buds on it also, but that is much more mature buds. Very flat plane that lowest branch makes. Here you can see some of the detail of the bark, and the reason why I wanted to not really mar this up with a lot of wire wrapping around things. Rather straight, this one. And where that deadwood will start, you can see there's a lot of moss on there. I'm going to be taking that down to bare wood, doing a little bit of carving of the wood, making some grain directions, hopefully just following the curve of that.